We're speaking about the things that specifically women cannot wear outside on Shabbat because it would be carrying different things that are different types of hats and tiaras and jewelry. And today we're going to focus on just one of them that we already mentioned yesterday. And that is back in the Mishnah. People muted. Back in the Mishnah here, we're talking about, we're gonna, let me get back to where we actually are. Sorry about that. Yeah, the question was a kabul. It's called a kabul. Mishnah says woman cannot wear a kabul. Now we're not sure what the kabul is. We saw yesterday there were two opinions. The BNI himself didn't know what it is, and so one possibility was that it is a seal of a slave that a slave would wear. We rejected that yesterday. Instead, we said it's a wool covering that goes over a woman's head. That's a kabul. She cannot wear it on Shabbat for whatever reason. Okay, that's what we decided yesterday. Today, however, we're going to see a different opinion. That's a kabul, right? But today we're going to go back to that other source, and this is Shemuel. Here's at the top of the page. Shemuel Amad Kabla Abda Tenan. In fact, when the Mishnah says that a woman cannot go out with a kabul, it's actually talking about an emblem that a slave would wear, in this case, a female slave would wear. If we want to see it, I will show it to you. Here's a picture. So these are Roman pendants that slaves would wear. These are, these were actual ones that were found by archaeologists. So you see that it might be attached to a necklace, chain, right? It also might be attached to his garment or her garment, and it could be most of these are all made out of metal, but in those days it might have been made out of other material like clay, but the metal ones would have lasted longer, so we get to see them. And on it has the name of the slave, the name of the master, and the point is he's walking around and everybody knows that this is this master's slave. And it affords the slave protection. No one's going to harm him because then they'll have to answer to the patron, and also that everybody knows that this is, he's not going to run away. He's going to work for the master. So that's what we're talking about, and that's going to be the main subject of today. You have a question?
I want to know what it said on the necklace.
Oh, you want to know what it said?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. It's the names. Oh, this one says "seize me." Apparently, I guess if he runs away, and this is tied, this is made out of metal around his neck, then he wouldn't be able to run away. People would seize him and return him. Okay, so it's quite an interesting item to be talking about because you have to make sure our slaves don't work on Shabbat as part of the commandment. So going out with this on, well, we can see why that might be a problem.
Is only for Evet Kanani, Rabbi?
Yes, it seems to be talking about Evet Kanani. That's what most of that's how the Rishonim understand this. And okay, good. Which is interesting because it means that the slave himself has to keep Evet Kanani has to keep laws of Shabbat the same as a woman does, and so can't carry.
Where's the carrying part here?
Well, if you're wearing this thing, is it considered jewelry? Not really. It's not jewelry.
Jewelry, I thought, because you're going to take it off and show it to your friend.
Right, so that's a problem. Right, jewelry in general is okay. It's not considered carrying because you like it. You want to wear it. Unless it's a type of jewelry that you might take off. Then it's a gezerah mitrabanan. But usually, regular jewelry that stays on is okay. But this, you can't call it jewelry because it's not an ornament for a person. All right, so that's what Shemuel says it is the Kabbalah. And now, Umi Amar Shemuel Hachi, Amar Shemuel Yoseh Ayved Bechotam Shebesavaro, Avalo Bechotam Shebichsuto. Shemuel has another statement that we heard in his name that says a slave can go out with a seal around his neck, but not with a seal that's sewed onto his garment. So this would mean that he is allowed to wear something on his neck and go out, but he just explained the Mishnah. The Mishnah is a list of things that he may not wear, and he explained that as a seal. So we have a contradiction between two statements of Shemuel. and we resolve it. La kashya hada abad le rabbe, hada abad ihu le nafsheh. One is the one that he's not allowed to wear in the Mishnah is one that the master makes for him and puts on him, because I'm sorry, that's the one that he is allowed to wear, because since his master made it for him, he's afraid he will not take it off. But the one he makes for himself, perhaps because he wants to go out and show protection that he's my patron, that one he may decide to remove. And so that one he would not be allowed to wear. So the Mishnah which says prohibited is talking about one that he makes for himself. And this statement of Shemuel that says he can go out with it around his neck is talking about one that the master makes for him. Okay, we learn a lot about like the master-slave relations in psychology from the details of these halachot. Wait, you just told me that the one that Shemuel just said, where he says it's allowed, is talking about that the master made it. But in that same statement, he also said that if it's sewed onto his garment, he may not wear it. Well, why not? His master made it. It's sewed onto his garment. So what's the problem? It's not going to come off. He's not going to take it off. We're worried about something else. We're worried that, in fact, it may fall off. And if it does, he can't be seen with wearing his cloak without the emblem, because he'll get in trouble. The master will say, why aren't you wearing it? What, are you trying to run away? And so what's he going to do? He's going to take off his cloak or fold it over his shoulder to hide the fact that it fell off. And then he's going to be carrying, because if you take your cloak and fold it over your shoulder, that is not considered wearing the cloak. That's considered carrying the cloak. So that's the difference. The one around the neck is not going to come off. The one that is on his clothing may come off, and he'll come to carry the whole thing.
Isn't a problem carrying a coat?
Right, you can't carry a coat. That's a good point. That's the halacha l'maaseh. You took a coat to Kanis, a raincoat. Now it's not raining and it's hot. You want to carry it home. There's no eruv. There's no eruv. You can't carry it around your shoulder. You can't carry the coat around on your shoulder.
But why does that piece of jewelry make it the mark or whatever? Make it a suit to carry on if you can't carry coat anyhow?
Right. So actually, if it was sewn on and you're wearing it properly, it would be okay. It would be like around the necklace. But he's making a gezerah midrabanan that it could sometimes it falls off. It's not sewn on. It's just, I don't know, pinned on or whatever. And it may fall off. And if it falls off, he can't get it back on. And he's embarrassed or he's afraid to walk around without it because the master will get him in trouble. And then he takes off his cloak and puts it on his shoulder. Okay, so there's a lot of steps, but we're trying to figure out, why Shemuel made a distinction. ואחד אמר לשמואל לרב חיננה בר שלה, כולהו רבנן דברש גלותה, לה לפקו בסר בעלי חתימה, לבר מינך, דלה כבדי עלייך דברש גלותה. And we have an actual practical example of this, because Shemuel said to Rav Chinana, all the sages under the Resh Galuta, the exilarch, he's a political appointed person in charge of the Jews in Bavel. He's the highest position of Jewry in Babel. Everything goes to him. He's like the liaison between the Persian government and the Jews. And he has the rabbis that are under him. They're appointed by him. They answer to him. And so the rabbis that were under the exilarch, this is amazing. I mean, I know this Talmud, this Gemara is got a lot of details we're going to see about what you can carry and so on and things. But in between the lines, you learn a lot of really interesting things. Socially, that the rabbis under the exilarch would have to wear one of these emblems, like a slave would wear for a master. They had to say, I'm a rabbi employed by the exilarch, right? And, paid by him and answer to him. And so all the rabbis under the Resh Galuta would have to wear this, except for Chinena. He says, because you are so close to the exilarch, everybody knows how loyal you are, so you wouldn't have to wear it. In other words, that person, Rav Chinena, would be able to walk outside on Shabbat with this on, because if it falls off, he won't hide it. He won't have to hide. He's okay. He can go with it. That means everybody else has to wear it. Okay, good. So that ends that discussion. But now we want we want to go into it further. Gufa, that's always a key word that says we just discussed it, but we want to explore it further as a tangent. Amar Shemuel, Yoseh Avid bechotam shebesavaro, aval lo bechotam shebichsuto. Good, we said that already. Tanya nami hachi, Yoseh Avid bechotam shebesavaro, aval lo bechotam shebichsuto. We actually have a baraita, a Tanaitic statement, says the same thing that Shemuel just said, that if it's around his neck, he can go out with it, but not if it's on his clothing. It's interesting that we have the same exact words from Shemuel, Namora, and a Tanaitic statement. Probably it could have been originally a Tanaitic statement that Shemuel's just repeating it. Maybe Shemuel's the one that authored it. Shemuel's high up, he's like the first generation. Maybe it was repeated then as a Tanaitic statement. However it happened, we have now it's backed up. But now we have a problem because there's another Baraita that says something different. All right, over this next page that we're going to be studying, there are a lot of Baraitot that we're going to see, and it might get a little confusing between all the different Baraitot, but we'll try to keep it straight. And one of the ways I'm going to keep it straight is because I circled this one, because this will be the main one we're going to keep coming back to. So I'll call this the red circled Baraita. Okay, as a methodological note, in general, when you have different Baraitot that say opposite things, a simple way that historically we might resolve it is to say it's a machloket. One Tana authored this baraita, and another Tana authored that baraita, and they disagree with each other. The Talmud Bavli, however, if they don't have names, it's going to assume that all the baraitot have to agree. It wants to harmonize all of them. The same thing that Midrash will do with Pisukim from different places. And so by trying to harmonize them, then it's going to have to think about why in this case does this, how come this says okay and this is not okay, and it'll make subdivisions between the cases. Because it has to do that, it leads to a lot of creativity in thinking about details of cases and principles that might be behind them. And so we actually, it leads to creative thinking about the basic principles. But, all right, that's just the methodology behind the difference between how we might historically peel off the layers and what the Talmud does. All right, so we have another baraita. This is lo yetzeh ha'eved bechotam shebesavaro velo bechotam shebichsuto, that a slave cannot go out with either seal, not around his neck and not on his clothing. So that's the main contradiction. But since we quoted the baraita, we're going to quote the whole thing, and it has 3 categories of cases. It says, by the way, that both zeh v'zeh and mekabelin tum'ah, both seals cannot receive tum'ah. In order for something to be a receptacle for tum'ah, has to be a kli, has to be a utensil, has to be a glass that can hold water, has to be a spoon, something that is useful. But this thing, it's not jewelry. Jewelry also would mekabel tum'ah because it's a useful item. But this is nothing. So it's not mekabel tum'ah, it's just a little placard, not really a utensil useful for anything. Okay, now while we're talking about this, velo bezug shebesavaro, aval yotzehu bezug shebichsuto. You're not talking about a seal, but rather a bell. And slaves would wear bells. Maybe you want to find where they are. And so if it's on his neck, he cannot go out with the bell around his neck, but he can go around with the bell tied to his shirt. Might be a decoration. Right? A bell's more like an ornament, and that's why zeh v'zeh mekabelin tumah. Whether the bell is on his neck or on his shirt, it is mekabel tumah because it is an ornament, and so it is a utensil. And now the third case is regarding animals. An animal also has a seal, an identification tag, so you know which animal it is and who the owner is. And it may not go out with a seal upon it. And it also can't go around with a bell. Not around its neck and not on its clothing. Not that animals wear clothing, but let's say it's wearing, it has a saddle cloth on it and you put a bell on it. Animal cannot go out with any of these. Zeh v'zeh and mekabelin tumah. And when it comes to a seal or a bell of an animal, they are not considered utensils. So that's an interesting thing, that a bell on a person is a utensil because, we'll see why, because it's an ornament, but a bell on an animal is not considered a utensil. All right.
For the slave, quick question. For the slave, is there a connection between the bells on his clothing with the bells of the Kohen and on his clothing?
Very good. I would assume so. I think the bells on the Kohen's clothing is showing that he is a servant of Hashem, a servant of the service of the Bet HaMikdash.
So, my point being that if the Kohen has to wear his clothes, we would assume then that all bells on clothing would be permitted.
What's the connection?
I'm saying, like, once you have the Kohen is allowed to wear his clothing with the bells on it, then any person who has
yeah, but the Kohen's wearing
bells,
it indoors. He's wearing it within the precinct. That's not considered a Shut HaRabim. And anyway, a Kohen can do anything that the Torah says a Kohen needs to do for the Bet HaMikdash is allowed to do on Shabbat. You can kill animals.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So now we're going to get back to our original question, which was that Shemuel said over here there is a difference between the one on the neck and the one on the clothing, and here he said, and here that Baraita said that, and this Baraita said they're all no good. So what are we going to do with this? We can use the same distinction we made before, that if he made it for himself, then he's not gonna take it off. But one sec. So that would mean here. Here, right here, he's allowed to go around with it on his neck because he's not going to take it off. But in this one, where he cannot go around with his neck because he made it himself, right? And if he made it himself, then he may take it off and carry it. So, well, that is a possible distinction we can make between them. But the Talmud would rather that both Baraita be talking about the same case. La idi v'idi da'abad le rabeh. So the owner made it. V'kan b'shel matechet, v'kan b'shel tit. One is made out of metal and one made out of clay. So the one made out of metal is the one that he's not allowed to wear no matter what. That'll be this one here. And the reason is because if it falls off, he's going to pick it up and bring it home because it's made out of metal, so it's precious. Whereas the one here that he's allowed to wear on his clothing, that's because it's made out of clay. If it falls on, it's made out of clay, it's probably going to break. And anyway, it's pretty worthless. And so he's not going to carry it and pick it up and take it back home. And in case you just think we've made up this distinction out of thin air, no, we have a good proof. Something that the master cares about, and then you're going to want to bring home, you can't go out with it in the first place because then you might carry it back home. But something that the owner doesn't care about, then you can go out with it because you won't bring it back home. And this also makes sense. Remember, and over here in the red circle, Baraita, we said that all these seals do not receive tum'ah. In other words, they're not vessels. Why are they not vessels? Well, it makes sense to say that they're not vessels if they could be vessels, if they were in a different shape. Because they're made out of metal, you have to say that metal in general, if it's any kind of vessel of metal, it would be mekabel tumah. But this, because it's just a seal, that's why it's not mekabel tumah. It wouldn't be necessary to say. But if it was made out of clay, what is saying? Only these made out of clay? But if it was something else made out of clay? No, that's wrong. Anything made out of clay is not mekabel tumah. We're talking about clay that's not burnt.
Sometimes they take, in the old days, they took kelim that were broken and took those shards and they wrote on them. So maybe maybe they wrote on it and that was part of a kelim.
Right. Okay. Good. It could be that, right? Because that's not mekabel tumah anymore. Or if it's just clay that's dried but not baked, that's also not mekabel tumah no matter what. Even if it's a cup, even if it's a bowl. If this Baraita in the red circle is talking about clay, right? These three kinds of vessels that never become tameh, made out of stone, dung when it dries, and earth. By the way, this is actually very important for archaeologists. Whenever they're going around and they find in a city that there are a lot of stone vessels, they know it's an Israelite city. Because stone vessel is very expensive, very hard to make, not so useful. Only someone who is careful about the laws of Tumah and Tahara would go to the effort of having stone vessels, because a stone vessel, even if it touches a dead body, you don't have to worry about it. It's not mekabel tum'ah. And so that's one of the identifying markers of Israelite cities that actually kept laws of tum'ah and tahara. Okay, so we solved that problem, and we resolved all the baraitot. But there's more baraitot to come. Don't worry. Amar mor velo bezug shebesavaro aval yosehu bezug shebichsuto. Now we just got that same baraita says that a slave can not go around with a bell on his neck, but it's okay if the bell is on his shirt. Zug shebesavaro amaylo. Why not? Why? What's wrong with it around his neck? Dilma mifsak b'atayel atuyeh. What the problem is that it might fall off and then he's going to carry it home. Well, aren't you worried about the same thing? If it's on his shirt, it also might fall off and he might come and carry it back home. Now, this is talking about a case where it's actually woven onto the argument, onto his garment, not just pinned on. And so it's woven on by an expert, by a tailor, so we're not worried that it's going to come off. I know we could have used this above to solve that problem. Why doesn't it use it above? Tosafot asked that question, but not for now. Amar Mor, okay, now Amar Mor is always quoting back, going back to that red circle baraita. Lo teseh behema lo bechotam shebesavara, velo bechotam shebichsuta, velo bezug shebesavara, velo bezug shebichsuta, ze vaze en mekabelin tumah. Regarding an animal, it cannot go out with anything, not with the seal, and not with bell, not around its neck, and not on its clothing, nothing. But they all are not mekabel tumah, not the seal and not the clothing. Okay, so that's a pretty across the board for animals. Now, question: Zug de behema en mekabelin tumah, ulminhu zug shel behema temea v'shel delet tehora. We have another baraita that says the opposite, that a bell of an animal is tameh. In other words, it can receive, it's a utensil, it can be mekabel tumah. V'shel delet, only one of a door knocker, a bell on a door, is always pure, cannot receive tumah. Although it's a utensil, there's another principle that if it's attached to the ground, anything that's attached to the ground cannot be mekabel tumah. That's very important, like a mikveh. That's why and a mikveh is built into the ground, so it can never become tumah. Anything that's connected to the ground. So once you put it on the door, right, that's connected to the ground. But anyway, we have a problem because here it says that an animal bell is mekabel tumah, and the red circle baraita says animal bell is not mekabel tumah. I'm continuing, the baraita continues, the one that we just quoted. We're going to read the rest of it, even though this is not directly relevant. Shel delet v'asa'o lebehema temea. Shel behema v'asa'o ledelet, af al pi shechibero ledelet ukvov masperim tameh. V'kol ha'kelim yordin lidei tumatam machshava, and olin midei tumatan ela b'shinui maaseh. This is an important principle that comes up a lot of times. That if you took it from a door and you said, I don't need this door knocker anymore, I want to put on my animal, then although it was not mekabel tumah on the door, it now becomes tameh when you put it on the animal. But if the other way around, I took it off my animal and put it on the door, even though now it's connected to the ground and I hammered it in, it retains the tumah that it had from when it was on the animal. Why? Because any utensil that is not mekabel tumah, if I just think about using it for a mekabel tumah in a mekabel tumah way, right? I just take the knocker off and say, I think I'm going to put on my animal. Then, by thinking about it, it becomes a utensil. It's not connected to the ground, and it can receive tumah. However, the other way around, if it was a utensil that was used and is mekabel tumah, then I cannot get out of that status unless I change it in some way. I have to hammer it, change the shape, and then it becomes like a new thing. But otherwise, if I just attach it to the door, it does not remove the status from before. Okay, so it's kind of like gravity always makes it go towards tumah. You really have to do an action to get it out of the utensil status. Okay, but anyway, back to our point. Our main question was regarding the animal bell. La kashya hadit le inbal, hadilet le inbal. Now you know what the hotel name means. It means the clapper inside the bell. So if it has a clapper inside, then it's tameh. That's what the second baraita was talking about. And our red circle baraita that said it's not mekabel tumah, that was talking about because it has no clapper. There's no clapper, it's not so useful. Why? What's the difference? What's the difference? If it should be utensil, either it is a utensil both ways or not a utensil. But what difference does the clapper make? No, it does make a big difference. It makes a sound. שנאמר, כל דבר אשר יבוא באש, תעבירו באש. אפילו דיבור יבוא באש. Generally, so for something to be a utensil, has to hold water, has to have some volume to it. But the Pesukim where we learn all of these things from is from when Bnei Yisrael beat Midian and that big war, and they take all the vessels and they have to purify all those vessels. And it says anything that is brought in fire, you should bring in fire again to kosher it. We learned all the laws about how we kosher utensils for Pesach, for meat and dairy. We learned it all from this place. Anyway, it says called davad. This extra word davad. Could have just said kol asher yavo ba'esh. What's the extra word davad come to teach you? That dibur, and if it makes a sound, something that's made out of metal, even if it doesn't contain anything, if it makes a sound, that's also a utensil. It's a musical utensil, and so that counts as a utensil as well. And so now we learned that if it has a clapper in it, then it's a utensil, it's mekabel tumah. If it doesn't have a clapper, and that's what our red circle baraita was talking about, that's then it's not a utensil and not mekabel tumah. All right, we're good. But now we're going to complicate it. Wait, you just said that a red circle baraita is talking about when it has no clapper? See, there was a lot of cases in that. Remember, 3 different cases, and the other one's talking about a slave where it is mikabel tumah. Remember that? Or should I show it? You remember it. Here it quotes it anyway. A slave cannot wear it around his neck, but he can put it on his clothing, and both the seal and either way, it is mikabel tumah regarding a slave. So regarding a person, regarding an animal that wears a bell, it's not mikabel tumah when it has no clapper. But if a person wears it with no clapper, then it is mikabel tumah. I mean, you can figure out maybe why. It's more of an ornament that a person likes, as opposed to an animal wearing it. It's different. But this is a problem because of yet another baraita. This one is actually a tosefta. Tosefta, really interesting tosefta. It says, zagin lemarteshet vela arisa. You make a bell for your mortar, mortar and pestle. So it's helpful if you put bells on it. That way you can kind of make a sound while you're doing it. My kids just bought spoons, musical spoons, right? And so that if you're while you're grinding, if you can make a beat, then it makes it better, as we say in the Ketoret. So they would do that. If you put that on marteshet or arisa or on a cradle, right? So you want the baby to sleep, and so as you rock it back and forth, they had little bells on them. Amazing, nothing changes. Mitpachot, sfarim, or mitpachot tinokot, or for coverings of scrolls like we do, so that when you carry the scroll, everybody knows that it's coming and they'll stand up. Or coverings for a little baby, also on its blankets, they would put little bells. Yesh lahem in baal temein, and lahem in baal tehorin. In those cases, it has to have a clapper, even though it's talking about people. It has to have a clapper. If it does have a clapper, then it's tameh, it's a utensil. If it doesn't have a clapper, it's tahor. If that clapper was taken out, netulin belahen, adan tumatan elahem, it remains in its tumah status, right? Because nothing physically changed in it. So now here we have a contradiction. These are bells without clappers made for human beings, and yet they are not mikabel tumah. And we said above that our red circle baraita is talking about bells without clappers for human beings, and they are mikabel tumah. Oh, you see the problem? Anemile betinok delakala abidile. Abal gadol takshitu le afalgam delet leinbal. I think the answer is brilliant. Depends, why are you wearing the bell in the first place? When you're putting the bell on a baby or on the Sefer Torah, the reason you're putting it there is because you want to hear the sound. And so the goal is only realized if it has a clapper in it. So when you shake it around, you will be able to hear the sound. Otherwise, it's not a utensil for that purpose. Whereas when an adult wears a bell, it's not to make sound. We don't want to make sounds when walking around. It's only for decoration. And so, since it's only for decoration, it doesn't need to have.
Oh, we're talking about a slave. You want to know where your slave is, or if he's running away.
Right. That's not the reason why he's wearing it. We're putting it on him as a decoration. We want our slave to look nice as he's walking around the house and doing his work. Right. So what we see from here that's not the reason, not like a cowbell. Okay. I just like this Tosefta because you identify with the people from 2,000 years ago, how they're swaddling their babies with and putting them in little bassinets with bells on them. Okay, good. So we resolved that problem, and now we go to the next one. Amar Mor, back to this Tosefta. This is like a tangent within a tangent, where it's like recursive questions. In this Tosefta just now, you said nitilun belahen adayin to matan alehen. Even if you had one and you took out the clapper, then it's still mekabel tuma. Okay. Lemay chazu. Well, why is it still mekabel tuma? What can you do with it? It's like it's a completely useless item. Just like Abi, you said before, you have a pottery and it breaks. It's no longer a tameh because it's just not useful. What's the point of having a bell with nothing in it? Abaya says, yeah, but it's very easy to fix. You don't have to go take it to a expert. Anyone could just take the clapper, hook it in, and so it's still a bell. It's just a bell that's slightly broken, and you do a little thing and fix it. So that's why it still retains its same status. That's what Abaya said. Rava, however, is not happy with this. He says these are one unit together, and such that if they were together and something tameh touched the bell, the clapper would be tameh too. If it touched only the clapper, the bell would be tameh also. But they have to be together for it to be a utensil. If it's not separated, I don't care how easy it is to put together, it's no good. And if you mean to say that although it's not attached, it's as if it's attached, oh, this is no good. The reason why it's no good is because for something to be attached, for it to be considered attached, it has to really be attached. Tumah is not going to jump from one item to another when they're separated, just because they're originally part of the same item, right? And so this doesn't work for him. Now his proof here is a little bit long. I'll come back to it in a second, just so you can see where Rava ends up. He says the bell, even without the clapper, is still a useful item because you can bang it onto something else and it'll still ring, right? You bang it onto a piece of clay and it'll still ring, right? A bell you can strike a bell. It doesn't have to be a clapper inside. Okay, that's going to be his final answer. But in the meantime, we want to prove that things have to be attached actually, physically, in order for them to be considered one. And we're going to learn that from scissors, which is a sugya that came up a few dapim ago. Whether it's scissors made of different parts connected to each other, or a carpenter's plane, which also has one unit and then has a blade that's connected to it, but that you can remove. They are considered attached regard for tum'ah, so that if a dead mouse touches one half of the scissor, the other half also becomes tameh. But it's not a chibur for when you want to purify them. If they become tameh lemet, and you have to sprinkle the water of para aduma on it, the law is that you have to sprinkle the para aduma. If you sprinkle on one half, then if it's all together, then the other half is also okay. But we say it's not a chibur for haza'ah. So if you have the scissors, you have to sprinkle on both halves. So in other words, we're machmir in both cases. For tum'ah, even touching one, to become impure, even touching one half, the whole thing is impure. But to become pure, you have to sprinkle it on both. Okay, and we say this is a contradiction. I mean, make up your mind. Either it is connected or not connected. If it is connected, say it's connected for both, and touching one half makes them both tameh, and sprinkling one half makes them both tahor. Or say they're not a chibur, and touching one half doesn't make the other one, and purifying the other half doesn't make. So what's the why doing that? In that case, we already said it's recalling what we said there. דבר תורה בשעת מלאכה חיבור בין לטומאה בין להזעה, שלא בשעת מלאכה אינו חיבור לא לטומאה ולא להזעה. Really, the principle is that while you're using the scissors, then it's connected, because now it's one utensil, you're using it together. And when you're not, when you put it back in the toolbox and you're not using it, then it's not connected because it's not a utensil because I'm not using it. So really, in principle, it should depend on whether I'm using it or not. But that's kind of confusing to people, because if you tell them, oh, it touched one half, the other half is also tameh. The other half is not tameh. Let's say it's in the toolbox, and the mouse is in the toolbox. It touched one half, and you tell him the other half is okay. He might think that's always the case, and then he'll make a mistake to when he's using it, that one half becomes tameh and the other half doesn't. But it's not true. It really does. And so we make a gezerah because it's so confusing. Anyway, all that was to say that regarding scissors and things like that, they, even if they're not being used, they still have to be physically connected for them to be considered one unit. And you can't say that regarding the bell and the clapper when they are separated. And so that's why Rava disagrees with Abaye. Instead, he offers this reason that the clapper is still okay. So we saw a lot of different cases that all came from the original case regarding the hat, the kabul, which Shmuel said is not a hat, but rather a seal that the slave wears. Once we got into that, we discussed all kinds of different details about the slave, where he wears it, or versus an animal, and many laws that came from there. A lot of benaitot, but we're able to resolve each benait on its place, and through that, come up with a lot of creative solutions. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen, amen. Thank you, everybody.
Does inval have the same etymology as anvil?
Oh. That's a good question. Sounds right.
All right.
But anvil doesn't really, it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, but